Hello, everyone. It looks like we have quite a few still joining us, and so we'll give them another minute. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christy Short, and I am the director at the Texas Success Center. Today's webinar is supporting students in times of crisis, and it is presented by InsideTrack, which is an affiliate of the Strata Education Network focused on helping students enroll, retain, and be career ready. InsideTrack is also a partner with the Texas Success Center on our Rodeo online professional development portal that's available to all Texas community colleges. A couple of administrative items before we begin. If you have questions, please type those in the Q&A block throughout the presentation. If they're for our presenter, then she will answer those at the end. If one of our other co-hosts can answer those in the text box throughout, then we will try to do that. And the webinar recording will be posted to the Texas Success Center website by early afternoon. You'll be able to find it at the link there. After you get to events, then just click on the title of this webinar. And at this point, I would like to invite Brad McCarahan from InsideTrack to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. We are so glad that you are here. Thank you for taking time out of your lives to join us. We know that right now it's a weird time, isn't it? And so there could be overwhelm and isolation and all sorts of uncertain feelings right now. And we want to call that out and let you know that we understand that. And that's, I think, why this webinar is poignant today. We've got two special guests with us today. Oh, by the way, I've been with InsideTrack for about 13 years. I am the senior trainer there, just so you know. Let me introduce our two guests. First, we've got Renee Remick. Hello, Renee, give us a wave. Renee has been with InsideTrack for 9 years. She has been our crisis support specialist for the last 4 of those. And she has certifications in applied suicide intervention and pro-sci change management. And she's just finishing her master's in data analytics, as one does. So we're glad that she's here. She's got all sorts of background in working in psychiatric facilities, etc. All right, our second presenter, Wave Lula. Hello, Lula, how are you today? She has been with InsideTrack for 12 years. She started just after I did. She is our lead crisis support specialist. She's got, are you ready for this? She's got certifications in applied suicide intervention skills, domestic violence advocacy, perinatal mood disorder, mental health first aid, poverty intervention, grief recovery model, and pro-sci change management. What I'm trying to say is that these two folks know a whole lot about supporting students in crisis. It is what they do for a living. I'm excited that you get to get some of their knowledge about this. Our intention for today is for you to walk away with some skills, some ideas about how to support your students throughout this whole nutty time that we're going through right now. And that might mean supporting yourself along the way, which we'll discuss. So that's where we're going today, all right? Thank you so much for joining us. Renee, I'm gonna hand it over to you to start us off. Oh, sorry, no, before I do that, here's our agenda for today, all right? We're gonna talk a little bit about what it means to bring theory, our trauma-informed theory into practice. We're gonna talk a little bit about what trauma-informed communication might look like, and Lula's gonna walk us through what the crisis intervention model is. We'll wrap that all up with some Q&A at the end, all right? We'll have you out of here in at least 90 minutes. All right, Renee, I'll hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad. Super happy to be here. I'll do a small shout out. I mainly grew up outside of Houston, so happy to be here with a bunch of other Texans. But Lula and I are not therapists. We're not here to provide therapy. In our role, we are experts in a crisis support service model for students. So that means that our model is here to just really better support our partner institutions to identify student needs, trends within their own student populations, maintain role clarity within multiple departments, better connect students to partner resources, and then really just create proactive policies and solutions to help students thrive. So just as a little of our own personal role clarity. Yeah, but to get us started, I think we're just kind of lay some groundwork for the theory that Lula's going to really dive in. She's the true rock star today. I'm going to say that. So just, I think starting with context, starting with a definition is great. So when we say trauma, we mean an experience in which a person's internal resources are not adequate to cope with the external stressors, such as adverse childhood experiences, sexual assault, racism, poverty. And right now we're going to have a lot of people that are experiencing, financial scarcity maybe for the first time. And that within itself is trauma. So students are entering school with their own goals and family and friends and trauma and their own existing network. But once they get connected to a university, there's a sense of being a part of that larger community. And our want with schools to be trauma informed is that when a student starts to go there, they're not just a student, but they're really interconnected to that entire ecosystem that you already have within your university, right? You are your own collective. And so when a student can really feel safe and understood, that school isn't just a part of their identity, but they're also a part of that school's identity. And we want that to really feel like a safe place for everyone. So to get a little further into, I'm also doing the slides for these first two parts, so just pardon me. So I'm going to read this out, but a trauma-sensitive school is one in which all students feel safe, welcomed, supported, and where addressing trauma's impact on learning is a school-wide basis at the center of its educational mission. An ongoing inquiry-based process allows for the necessary teamwork, coordination, creativity, and sharing of responsibility for all students. Just to center us today. So now for the fun stuff, talking about the brain. So here's a little diagram. The prefrontal cortex is in the red. That's where you're doing your learning, your critical thinking, your long-term, problem solving. The limbic system is the blue in the middle. That's the fear center. That's your emotional memory. And the cerebellum in the back near the brainstem, that's where you're doing a lot of like the motor control, breathing, your heart's going, things like that. So I do have a background working in mental health, and I think something that really helped me think about brain and development in a really different way. And Brad, stop me if this isn't interesting. But so when you're kids, you
I
grow.
will.
Oh, good. Yeah, when you're kids, you grow from the extremities in. So if anyone has, kids of your own or close to them, right, when a kid outgrows their shoes, that's when you know they're about to have a growth spurt because you're growing from your hands and your feet, and then your legs and then your spine. Your brain is the same thing. It grows from a particular way. And so it's going from your lizard brain, your brainstem and your cerebellum. It's starting there, and then as it grows and matures, like the last thing is this prefrontal cortex, which for teenagers, you've got an adult-sized fight or flight emotional memory, but then you've still got a child-sized like long-term thinking. And when I learned that, that really made like a lot more context for like me as a teenager.
When
So
does that fully develop, Renee?
yeah, I'm waiting for that to happen, Brad.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's around like the mid 20s, but I think the brain's like fully developed around 28. But don't quote me on that.
All right.
But teenagers aren't there yet. But so your brain is here to detect threats. It's going to activate your sympathetic nervous system when it's detecting a threat, and that's part of your autonomic sympathetic nervous system. You don't need to remember these big words. But what I want to say is that that's related to your digestion and your breathing. And when your brain is in that like fight or flight mode, trying to detect a threat, it's going to release adrenaline and cortisol, which increases heart rate, blood pressure, all those things that we think about with like the fight or flight stuff. But what we've found with trauma and brains is when you have exposure over long periods of time to cortisol, that wreaks havoc on your brain, and cortisol can literally cause it to decrease in size, and that impacts your ability to make decision, make judgment, and learn. So we're trying to think about this as educators. What do we want to know about the brain and trauma? That is not its friend for creating a great learning environment. Does that make sense, Brad? Anything I should?
No, it totally makes sense. Yeah. The
Great.
lizard brain in the middle has always fascinated me. So yeah, we revert back to lizard brain during times of stress, right?
Yep. So that's what our next example is going to be about. We're going to do a little exercise, get us warmed up this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. So if you want to hold up your hand, we're going to basically make a little brain here. So if this is our like brainstem and the cerebellum, that stuff in the back, your thumb is going to be your amygdala. So this is the little center part of your brain, which is all of your emotions. So we're going to fold your thumb across the palm. That's the limbic system, right? Memories, things like that. And this is also where your safety radar is, your amygdala. So now you fold your fingers over your thumb. So you have this little fist, not a good punching fist, but just like a little fist here. And that is going to be your cerebellum, your like prefrontal cortex as well. Right, so this is all the thinking and the planning, the long-term thought stuff. So your fingernails here, this is the area of the cortex that's right up and up against that prefrontal cortex of you. And that's where the brain is processing information about how we relate to others as well. So understanding our feelings, ability to make ourselves calm, make choices, morality, all that like good stuff. So when we flip our lid though, when we're in stress, that's when our prefrontal cortex just shuts down. It's just, nope, it's not there. We are now relying on this buddy right here and this. So we're all emotions, we're all fight or flight. And so our goal so that's end of exercise, put your hands down, thank you. Everyone did great. So our goal as educators working with trauma-informed, trying to be trauma-informed is to help our students keep their prefrontal cortex. So we want to get them into the green state. We want to keep them in a learning mode. So before I dive into this, I kind of want to give another example.
Yeah,
So
too.
thank you. When someone's really stressed and that prefrontal cortex is shut off, even if you have a solution, even if you know the answer, they might not be in a state where they can hear it. So I was working with a student once upon a time with a school, and they had a mistake with some financial aid emails. So some people got incorrect financial aid emails that were very alarming, that had nothing to do with their account, and they hadn't sent out the like correction email quite yet. And I got a call from a student who this was going to be pretty life-changing if that had changed for them, and it was going to mean some pretty immediate danger for them, you know, food, shelter, rent, things like that. And they were so upset, and they called in, and I wanted to be like in that fix it mode, and I was just like, oh, don't worry about that, like it's a mistake, like this is what happened. And they just couldn't even hear me. That frontal lobe's just shut off. I have a solution, and they're not at a place to hear it, and that's my mistake. So I think as educators, we need to remember that we want to try to get the student back down to that green zone where they can actually hear it, and that means sometimes sitting with it.
So that student was like right in
Yeah,
their reptilian
yep.
brain, the amygdala, the whole time.
They flipped it. Yep, they're just in fear. They're in reaction. They're not necessarily processing all that information the way that they normally could when they're really calm. Yeah, so, and that means sometimes we're just going to have to make sure that we fully understand what this means for them, give them time to talk it out, make sure that we really are listening to what their needs are, and getting them to a place where we can then actually like problem solve. Because if they're up here, even if you've got great information, they're not going to hear it. You got to bring them back down here. So think of that kind of like as the learning brain in that green zone. That's where you're going to be open to things. That's when you can really listen and think through critically. Once you get in that yellow zone, it's going to be a little bit harder. Some things are going to start to come up. Your body's maybe going to start to release that adrenaline and that cortisol. And then once you're in that red zone, like this is not where we're learning things. This is where we're being reactive, and we're just trying to survive. And that's not going to be conducive to education. So that is our our groundwork for what Lula's going to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Renee.
Yeah, let me get us to the next slide, guys.
I'm gonna now invite Lula to tell us a little bit more about, okay, so we've got our brain stuff going, right? We've all made the hand, and we know where our amygdala is. Lula, tell us, how do we continue to communicate with folks then?
Yeah, I'm so glad to talk to you all today about this. Especially right now, I feel like it's such crucial work that we're doing, and we could really be making a lot of changes in folks' lives in a very dynamic way. So one of the things that I'm really excited to talk to you all about is what trauma-informed communication is for us. Of course, you probably have experts on your campuses and universities that really are already doing research on this. You might have therapists or counselors that are experts in this kind of skill set already. So I encourage you to lean on those folks and try to incorporate their skill sets into these conversations. One of the things that I think is really common is that we all feel like the world is on fire around us, and we're just trying to just say, this is fine. So this is just a popular meme that Casey Green created a long while ago. And I feel like this feels very relevant for us today. And
it does.
Yeah, and so we really just want to make sure that we are, instead of just saying, this is fine, let's start talking about what it is that's happening in students' lives. One of the skill sets that we have and we've really worked on here at InsideTrack is compassionate and holistic assessment skills. And we found that not only do compassionate and holistic assessment skills help you listen to what is important, but it actually gives you an opportunity not to impose your own personal ideas onto the students. And what I love about this is, like, you're not just listening to a student and validating their own experiences, but you are taking time to be just a companion in their own personal experience. So at InsideTrack, we have this foundation of deep compassion and kindness for the students that we're working with. And we try to remember that in all conversations with students, we're really able to meet adversity with compassionate listening. So and you might be wondering to yourself, like, Lula, what the heck does that mean? I don't even know what you're talking about. But what we like to do here is take it a step further to just thinking about building skills around very specific skill sets around trauma-informed communication. So what that might look like is using validation phrases. We put some examples here so that you all can utilize this. Feel free to either write these down, take a photo of it with your phone, If you like, we'll also have a recording of this on a website, so you're more than welcome to utilize that later. And what we like to do is understand that not only are people really empathetically overloaded, especially right now, but it's crucial that we have role clarity with our students and that we're not trying to be experts in all things. We really want to make sure that our students are getting connected to not just the appropriate resources, but people that are licensed to do the right work. So if you are lucky enough to be one of the folks that, or one of the campuses and universities that do have lots of counseling and therapeutic resources on campus, we strongly encourage to get those folks connected. But sometimes to those therapists, but sometimes those therapists are really overloaded, especially right now, and so they might need to outsource some of that work and get those students connected to community resources. So what does that look like for you all on your campuses? That's just an idea for you all to start thinking about. What we do also is we try to follow up with students that we know are in immediate crisis or are in chronic need of support. So what that might look like is for students that are in concerns about their health or basic needs, so we might be outreaching to that student directly to make sure that they not only receive the support that they needed, but also received some of the deep care among our faculty and staff that they should be getting. And not only does this really allow us to access our own personal resources and communication, but it helps us to reduce our own compassion fatigue by not trying to be the expert of all things. So with students, I'm just going to break this down into some basic steps of what we do. We try to make sure that we are asking trauma-informed questions. So what that might look like is instead of saying like, that doesn't sound so bad, you're going to be okay, which really minimizes the student's concern, we want to say like, what's the most helpful thing for us to focus on today? What's important for you right now? Because sometimes the students, we're talking to them and they almost like verbally dump all the things that are happening in their lives. And it's really difficult to suss out what is most important. So I say like lean on the students to be the experts of their own lives and ask them what is most important and that they do deserve the support. We try to write down on lots of notes when we're working with students and make sure that we are communicating with one another and help students build the self-advocacy skills that are really crucial. And one of the things that we also try to do that I think has been really, really helpful for us that if you're not already doing, one of the things I just recommend is debriefing with one another. And after you've supported a student that's experiencing a crisis or traumatic situation. And it just helps us have some sense of professional accountability with one another. And really, I like to utilize that as a thought exercise and have these thought partners with our staff, because our staff, we're really lucky to have a lot of folks that just have a lot of skill sets and they have a lot of ideas. And there's some folks that are better connected to community resources that we can actually utilize with our students. And remember, boundaries are your friend. It really will make a huge difference in your life and the life of your staff to really have role clarity and boundaries with students. And it's a loving way to be supporting students without trying to be the expert. So recently not so recently, but in the past few months, we had this student. I'll just give you an example of a student situation that we had at a university that was a really well-known university, and that was one of the top tier universities. And a student called in and had expressed to the coach that they had been working with for a long time. For some of you that don't know, we also do academic coaching. So when I say coaching, that's what I'm referring to. So they had called in to work with this coach that they had been working with for a while. And this was a high-performing, highly effective student, had a history of doing really well, and they were in a master's program. But they sounded really different. And they started talking about the Illuminati and all these other things about why they didn't want to post things in their online course that they were taking at the moment. And they expressed some of the other paranoid concerns that they had. And what really happened is that the coach starts shutting down, and the advisor that had connected them to the coach was also like, I don't know what to do. The student doesn't even want to talk to any of the therapeutic care that we have on campus. So I'm not sure, this isn't my expertise. What the heck am I supposed to do? So they sent the student to me, and I just sat there and listened to them and validated their experience, that it sounded really scary and overwhelming. And sooner or later we were able to uncover that the student's medication had not been, they were having some financial difficulty, and they didn't get their medication taken care of in the time that they needed. And so as a result, they were having a psychotic break. This is all, and we just built some conversations and followed up with the student. We made sure we got them connected to some local resources for medical care, specifically some organizations that do advocacy for folks that don't have insurance. And the students went back into class and was thriving after that, after they got their medication taken care of. So it's just, these are opportunities to really help identify what is going on with the student, rather than feeling like we are ostracizing them or just getting really scared and unable to help them. So this is a model that's really worked for us, and it's helped us feel just deeply compassionate, if you will. Not to drive that word into the ground. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what our crisis interventionist model is here, and why we started doing crisis interventionist work rather than just having like a referral hotline. We started building our crisis student services model specifically. Some of you all might be familiar with this model because either you know folks that are involved in community services related to CIT, which is crisis intervention teams across the United States, that some of them work with police departments, some of them work with community services, and some of them work in social work or mental health care. And what they do is create a model that feels more scalable for folks that are not necessarily mental health therapists or folks that have that kind of licensure, because we really want to make sure that we're partnering with the student to identify what it is that the student might be going through. So the first thing that we do is we really try to lay the groundwork to assess the student's crisis. And we do this through skillful, non-judgmental listening and compassionate listening, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But as we're sitting there listening to the student's experience, we're really just building our relationship with the student. We're building our trust with the student. And we want the student to feel not just like heard, but validated. And as they're sharing these concerns that they might have, we're helping them identify, and they might be identifying themselves, what the cause and immediate concerns are for that student. So a student might say, I'm deeply concerned about my financial aid, and I'm really concerned about my basic needs, but I'm also concerned about classes. This is just a great opportunity to just ask that one question, like, what is the most important thing for you right now? And they might say, oh, I just really want to focus on my class right now. I need to make sure I pass this. So we know that we're going to take the time to really focus on what the class needs are, if you will.
Hey,
And
Lula,
what,
can I
yes.
just, I think that this model can support with concerns around the coronavirus, which we've got a question about how you might even talk to someone if someone brings up the fact that they have contracted the illness, or that that perhaps someone in their family has suffered from this. How do we apply that to this situation?
Yeah, so we validate and say, like, you're right, this is really scary. And this is such an overwhelming experience to expect, to feel like you are trying to balance so much at the same time. And so what you're trying to do is not just validate the student, but then you're going to try to work with the student on identifying what are actual support options for that student. So it depends on where your student's located. Here we do, we work with students nationally and internationally. So our model has to be adaptable for a lot of different environments. And we will look at resources on a county level. So I would encourage, for those of you who are getting students already disclosing that either they have a family member or somebody else that is unfortunately dealing with the COVID-19, we want to make sure that they are not just getting connected to the right county resources. So that might be, what's county protocol? Do they actually have tests locally for them to be taking? How far along are they? And these are not questions you need to know, but these are questions we're just getting them connected to those resources. And there's lots of websites out there that specifically say, that walk them through this. So we have been giving a CDC website, the CDC website that says, like, do you have these symptoms? What are the questions you have? And then on follow-up with that, we don't just focus on the health aspect, but we really focus on the overwhelm and stress that comes along with that. So the other concerns that we've been having is we work with a lot of students that are in healthcare right now. So we might be giving them specifically stress, not just stress management tools, but tools that are being available right now that normally cost money, that are available right now for students that are in healthcare or professionals that are in healthcare right now. And that might be meditation apps, that might be breathing exercises that are, or free yoga classes for healthcare professionals that their local yoga studio is providing. It can be so many different things, but first and foremost, the student has to be bought in to what you're providing. They need to help be part of that. That's like the next part of this model, is really making sure that you understand what are their coping skills. Maybe this is the first time they've ever dealt with a health issue in their family. Maybe this is the first time they've ever had some health issues, and maybe it's not. And so really make sure that you're asking the student, have you ever dealt with something healthcare wise that's been this scary? Do you have access to healthcare on a regular basis? Do you have insurance? So if we know that they don't have insurance, like that's a really easy way to start getting them connected to, there's an incredible resource out there called Needy Meds. And I'm not here to give you all a ton of resources, but if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend you check it out, needymeds.org, and call them, learn more about what they provide. The nonprofit organizations out there that are already doing patient advocacy and advocacy for folks that are underinsured or uninsured. So I want to know that the students are actually interested in receiving some of those resources. A lot of our students know where these resources are already regarding the healthcare stuff, but they may not feel like there's resources out there for dealing with the stress and overwhelm that are coming along with that. Your university or college might already be developing some resources. Make sure that you let the student know what those resources are. And my other question for you would be, are you extending those to their immediate family? Because these folks are taking care of their family members, and we really want to make sure that some of these resources are also available to immediate family members if you have the capacity to do that. And if not, then who in your community is doing that kind of work? And then the next step to this triangle, if you will, is really advocating for the student. So when I say advocating, I don't just mean give a student a resource and say good luck to you. I mean, call these organizations, get a contact person, identify who the person is on campus, transfer them specifically to Julia in accounting, or whoever it is that you're trying to get that student connected to, so that they not just have a name for that department, so that they feel like they feel some ownership and visibility that they're actually being seen. And then the next step that we do is we follow up with students to make sure that they're actually receiving the care that they're supposed to be receiving. So I know that we're doing a very brief introduction about the kind of things that we're doing, but we're hoping to share these practices with you so that you all can start utilizing this kind of model if it feels relevant, or the bits and pieces that feel relevant to you. Just remember, there might be some of these types of trainings, like CIT training. Your local police department might actually be providing this for free, and it might be available to you if you just reach out to them. So,
hey, Lula, you mentioned a website. What was that website again?
Yeah, it's needymeds.org.
Okay. Great, thanks.
Yeah, and there's so many resources out there that are really non-traditional. I say look for the folks on your campus and your staff already that have these types of research skills, that are already doing this kind of work. I'm certain that y'all have somebody already that is doing, that knows. They're like, oh, Maria over there in academic advising seems to know what's always available in Travis County. I'm going to go reach out to Maria. Like, just make sure that you're leaning on your folks that actually utilize it, that have this expertise, but and use them to just help you develop those skills. We don't want that person to be doing all the heavy labor, but we do want to be using that kind of expertise. So for the sake of time, we're just going to move on to crisis intervention listening skills for what we do. So like I said before, I am certain that y'all have some experts on your campus right now. They might be counselors, they might be therapists that have these types of skills already, and they might be even grief support specialists, just people that really know how to not just hold space, but pretty much listen and validate a student's experience. So we try to integrate these types of crisis intervention listening skills because it's not just helped us have great conversations with students, but this is where the foundation of building that relationship with the student and building that trust is. So
Lula,
yeah.
am I right that these are like this is what it looks like, right? You can use that triangle, but these are the actual skills that you're going to be using while you do that model, correct?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to reframe it. Yeah. Because what you're doing is you're listening to beyond what the student is saying. You're listening for the tone, you're listening for fear, you're listening to references of coping skills. So they might reference when they're sharing what their objective is for going to school, they might be sharing some things that they've survived already. So you might not be pointing that out. You're not asking them to restate your trauma, but you're really just taking note of like, wow, this student has really been resilient and has survived so many things. And it's just helping you understand that they've built a lot of coping skills. For us, we use a lot of deep acceptance with students. We use authenticity and genuineness. And so what that might look like is saying like, you know what, I actually don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to do my best to try to find out some more results with you and find out what's actually happening. Recently, I've been talking to a student who's in a pretty dire situation and doesn't have stable housing and sometimes doesn't have safe housing in Pennsylvania. And I can't give him, because of the lack of resources right now with COVID-19, I just can't give him the kind of results that I would typically be able to give to a student, which is like getting them connected to housing experts locally, providing transitional housing opportunities for them, and being really transparent about like what I can do and what I can't do for them. But right now I'm using my transparency skills to just say like, hey, I don't have all the answers right now. Things are changing every hour regarding resources and what is available at the moment. So let's make sure that we're staying in contact. And I actually heard from him this morning before we started this webinar. So that student is already feeling like they not only can trust me, but they can reach out to me and have this open line of communication. And I tell them very specifically, like, this is how much time I have. This is what I'm capable of doing, so that they don't have these expectations that I have all the time in the world to talk all day. I will just say, you know, I have 10 minutes today to really talk about this, and we're going to talk a little bit more next week. So
Tell us a little bit more about the transparency, right? Like, so because students might not understand why you're asking all these questions.
yeah,
Is that true?
I feel like a lot of times when I was academic advising, I would often, early on in my career, I was an academic advisor, and I would say stuff like, how are you doing today? And the students sometimes were really defensive or just say, fine, things are fine, which is really common. But I wasn't clear about why I was asking. So now what I say to students is, I know things are really difficult. Last time we talked, so I'm referencing they know that I'm listening to them. I say, the last time we talked, you mentioned that your mom was in the hospital and that you were also trying to finish your midterms, and that you were really concerned about this, whether or not your job was going to exist after this. And I'm just reaching out and just just wanted to know, how are you coping with a lot of the changes that are happening right now? How is this affecting you and your family? So I might start with, hi, how are you doing? But I'm really just like reframing it so the student understands what it is that I'm actually asking and why. And
Yeah.
they just feel like they know that you don't really have an agenda, and they just want to know, they know that you're just trying to meet them where they're at. So
Sure.
yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So that's just we're really just trying to give you a, if this was an abstract to the work we do, this is exactly what it would be. So that's some information about that. You all might have some students that are needing more chronic support, and I'll just give you an example of what that might look like. So there are a lot of students that need additional care and follow-up because their situations are far more complex than our universities are prepared for, our colleges, or even our community resources are prepared for. And we try to normalize this with a deep sense of compassion in all of our campuses that we work with. And one student that I've been working with for a long time, she has really just had every single barrier you can possibly imagine come up in her life, from her youth to her adult years, including losing her job and her eyesight, and starting to lose her eyesight all at the same time because of a really rare condition. And she's in her early 20s. And also losing her insurance at the same time, and trying to navigate how to take care of her siblings that she, after foster care, they were able to all link up and be finally housed together, and living together as adults. So she's just been in a place that just feeling really deeply hopeless. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do with the student is have really honest conversations about where she's at on a regular basis and validate her experience. But you might say, like, okay, that's great, we can just do that, but what else is there to that conversation? Well, what I'm really hearing from that student is the student has disclosed this really rare eye condition. And normally in the past, I wouldn't ask more questions. I'd be like, oh my gosh, that's so terrible, I'm so sorry, gosh, I hope that gets better for you. And that would kind of be the end of the conversation. And then you would just send them on and maybe get them connected to some healthcare on-campus resources, and that was it. And then I just feel like deeply powerless. But what instead I was able to do is actually call some local resources for Lions Club and some other organizations locally in the area that she lives in, South Carolina, and talk and have some conversations after some back and forth with leaving messages with some folks and some nonprofits. And I reached out and had a really frank conversation. And of course, because of FERPA, I don't disclose anybody's personal information, but I just say, like, you know, this is a situation for this person that I've been working with. And I just wanted to give you some insight about, like, is there any options for this person's very rare eye condition that needs this extremely expensive surgery? And this person on the phone from Lions Club said, actually, there is. And I thought, what are the chances? I'm just going to make this phone call and just like hope, you know what, I'm just going to hope, and I'll probably be disappointed. But no, he said, like, absolutely there is. We actually have a whole program. They just have to fill out some paperwork and talk to us, and we can fund part or most of their surgery. And I thought, oh my, that's not even advertised on their website. I was just using them as a resource. So I was just calling them to see if they knew of any other resources that they could recommend for me. And the student is now connected to them and working on getting the care she needs for her eyes. But that's just like, those are some of these very small changes that took very little effort on my end. All I did was leave voicemails, and it was only a handful. And it's because I have built these advocacy skills that students sometimes learn as a result of going to our incredible schools around the country. They learn how to build these advocacy skills with time. So this visual here is really to just give you a sense of, like, we do a student crisis intervention assessment with a student, and we might be also doing ongoing student assessment at the same time. but meaning that we're continuing to have these conversations with the student and assessing what the lethality is. For the lethality, for some of you who don't know, lethality might be assessing for suicidal ideations. It might be assessing for some of their basic needs and how dire the situation is, or some of their healthcare needs. But in the meanwhile, in the background, if you will, we're really trying to advocate for the student with some of our community services and community partners. And some really great examples of this are a school like ACC is a great example of a school that has already created an infrastructure like this. Amarillo is another amazing example of an infrastructure that they've created where they already have community services built into, and in almost like a seamless way into the campus. And students are able to start getting access to those resources almost effortlessly. Now with COVID-19, this is a whole different ballgame because we're actually leaving a lot more voicemails and doing a lot more Zoom meetings and telemeetings. So I'm not sure how y'all are adapting to that, but I'm sure y'all are in some incredible ways because, you know, you have some really inspiring models already out there. And then after we've already been assessing with the student and advocating for the student in the background, we start making sure that we're checking in with the student until we feel confident that they've received the support that they need. We do not, by no means, do we continue leaving voicemails once the student doesn't want to talk to us anymore. That is not, we are not encouraging that, and we don't want students to feel like we're chasing them or anything like that. We really just want to make sure the students feel seen and heard. And I think like one of the things that naturally happen after we've been doing this work for a long time is we start experiencing some compassion fatigue. This comic in the New Yorker is such a great example because it's, you know, normally I would say something mildly encouraging, but right now I'm just having a bit of compassion fatigue. Y'all might be feeling that right now. You might be feeling that because of your own sense of powerlessness that might be happening, the complications that are happening in your own personal life as a result of this pandemic. But really, sometimes just witnessing somebody in distress and feeling that deep sense of powerlessness, it can evoke a range of so many emotions, from frustration to despair. And we're really cognizant of that at InsideTrack, and we really try to be thoughtful about how our staff is thriving in those experiences. So if y'all are leaders on your campuses, if you're not necessarily have a leadership title, but you just happen to be a leader on your campus, but there's so many of you that are, we strongly encourage all of our partners to really be thoughtful about creating a self-care model for their staff as part of their regular professional development. And it not only increases like self-awareness, so a self-care model might be doing self-care assessments regularly with your teams, making sure that these are essential parts of the conversation and not just seeing them like before. I was telling Brad recently that when somebody said self-care, I would just have a deep eye roll. It's not from the culture that I'm from. That is just like not something people do.
Self-care's for Oprah. Let's just
Yeah.
say it, right? Only
Yeah.
Gwyneth Paltrow does self-care. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, people like that are really into Goop are only self-care people. But really self-care is going to look very different for everybody, and we have no judgment about what that might look like for you. But if the negative, if your staff is dealing with a lot of crisis and trauma, which naturally they will be as a result of this, whether we like it or not, if it's not effectively processed, it's going to start transferring into their subsequent meetings with other students. And it's not only going to affect their other student relationships, but it's also going to affect the other interactions that they have with their coworkers and start leaking into their personal lives. One thing that I saw in my life is that I didn't want to talk to my spouse when I was really depleted at all. Like I just wanted to either go for a run or watch TV, but just like not be around anybody, which is okay if that's for a moment, but that's not sustainable long-term to just like not speak to anybody that you live with because I'm just deeply depleted. So if we react without a plan when we're experiencing compassion fatigue, it really can diminish not only, like if you need to think about like the ROI around this, which is totally fine. It's part of the reality. But if we don't create a plan for compassion fatigue and self-care on our campuses and with our staff, it really is going to diminish not only the team focus, but their productivity. And people are more likely to call out sick. They're more likely to just not be able to work as effectively as they normally can. So that's my little rant about why it's so important, if you will.
Hey, do you have any like self-care assessments? A question has been raised. Is there a certain assessment, or is this a?
Yeah, there's actually a website that has all this. There's also at a University of Buffalo, they have this built into their I think it's in their social work program, but they have a lot of compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma resources. Y'all might be curious, like, what the heck is the difference between compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma? I'm not going to go into, for the sake of time, we're not going to go into all the details around that. We're just going to talk about compassion fatigue today. But I would encourage, look at University of Buffalo. You're also going to look at something called compassionfatigue.org. That's the other resource that I can recommend. And compassionfatigue.org has assessments, tests. They have, they have so many resources, and they're all free.
Great.
And I'm a really big proponent of using free resources and trying to use a lot of the resources that are already built in to your community infrastructure, because you not only are utilizing the community infrastructure, but you're also building relationships with folks that are already doing this work and that are professionals in this work.
Yeah, good point. I'm sure a lot of these community colleges have resources right around.
Yeah, you all probably have a plethora of like skilled folks that you're so lucky that you have that. So remember, compassion fatigue is really just the emotional and physical exhaustion it's the feeling of being really worn out and ineffective of your own work, and it leads to emotional distress. And like I said before, really ineffective professional behavior and depression. And if you need a definition for yourself, compassion fatigue is the cumulative effects of the work of helping. And it's also, it's the effects of supporting other people through very challenging situations. So you might be spending a great deal of time listening and empathizing with people. And some of y'all might be driving home and just feeling deeply, or not even driving at this point, we're all probably working from home, just deeply feeling physically and emotionally exhausted. So those can be signs of compassion fatigue. Remember that there's a body of research related to helping professions that really talks about the difference between compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, and that if they're not addressed, that it actually can lead to burnout. One of the things that I would recommend, if you haven't already, is look at Trauma Stewardship Institute. They're based out of the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. So that's Trauma Stewardship Institute. And they're one of the leading experts on compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. And they have a lot of resources on their website. They have YouTube videos that are free, and it can really just help build the foundation for conversation among your staff too. So you might wonder, like, how do you start addressing some of the stress on your campus with your staff versus like also transforming the demoralization that y'all might be experiencing right now. So like I said before, we know compassion fatigue is a cumulative effects of helping each other, of helping folks. But really, we want to in order to address the stress of compassion fatigue, and also, this I believe is from this image is from the Trauma Stewardship Institute. So if you want to be able to do this in a way that's effective, you have to create a model in which self-care is part of the bare minimum, and nurturing activities and some sort of escape that is not like a self-harm escape, if you will. So like going to the bar and getting wasted is probably not the best way to deal with the situation.
So I shouldn't be drinking 3 bottles of wine a night, is what you're saying.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's, like think about what is actually escape for you. Escape might be watching a show that feels like exciting, a sci-fi show or something that feels like exciting for you, but not necessarily watching a documentary that is breaking down all the ins and outs of a trauma that you were just talking about at work. So like, just think about what that might mean for you and your folks, and there should be no judgment about this as well. So transforming the demoralization of compassion fatigue, I found that if we create meaning around it and we start challenging what those negative beliefs are around our demoralization, it really, it's not only like, I mean, I think a small example of this that folks have been doing right now is if you've seen that hashtag on Twitter that's like, tell me something good or something so good or something like that. I'm not even on social media, so I probably shouldn't even be talking about it. But it's really like people giving examples of things that are really good that are happening in their own communities. Like that in itself starts transforming the demoralization. And gratitude lists is a great example. Gratitude lists or gratitude journals. And I'm telling you, 10 years ago, y'all would never expect for me in the world that I lived in to ever say any of the things that I'm saying right now. I was the person that did not believe any of these things. So it is a pretty big difference once I start integrating some of these tools into my own personal life, what a huge difference it started making in my own life. So if you're feeling skeptical and don't really believe it, that's okay. Just I just encourage you to try it out, okay, and see how it works. I also believe in, one of the things that have been happening for me is like, I start participating in community building activities. So what does that look like in your community? And these are things that we can talk to our students about. These are easy things that we can talk to our students about so that they can feel like they have not a sense of control, but a sense of of hopefulness rather than helplessness right now. And I'm going to give you an example of what we use in our conversations with our staff. So feel free to grab a pen or take a photo of this. We try to think of like, how do I get my staff into a place of performance and renewal? And we don't make judgments about where they're at right now, because there could be a lot of different things happening with your staff's personal life too. But part of that, doing those self-care assessments from that compassionfatigue.org, is really to just identify where you are on that spectrum. And there's so many free resources out there. And a lot of it might even be already available to you. You might know somebody on your campus that's already doing this. So think about where you are. Just take a moment. You don't need to post this in the chat necessarily, but think about where you are right now. And this might change. Remember, this might change on a daily basis, and it might even change on an hourly basis right now. I'll tell you that the other day I was feeling like I was in survival mode, that the coronavirus fear finally hit me, and I've been in performance zone for a long time. And I'm feeling like I've moved towards performance zone right now. But this is just like a really great way for us to normalize these conversations with our staff and to help us think about some of the feelings of powerlessness that we all might be experiencing. So some of the signs of compassion fatigue might just be a deep feeling of not being able to concentrate, or apathy or sadness. You might find yourself, I feel like isolating for others doesn't feel appropriate for this, since a lot of us are in self-isolation or quarantined right now. So maybe that's not the best example, but think about that. If it wasn't within this context, you might have folks that are just saying like, I am so mentally tired right now. And for me, I'm a person that gets bottled up emotions and forgetful when I'm deeply having a lot of deep compassion fatigue. And I find that the way I've seen this most with staff is when they're having a reduced sense of meaning at work. So those are some examples of what that might look like for you or your staff. You might wonder, like, how does this start affecting me? How does it start manifesting? So there's some repetitive things here from the previous slide, but it really might start looking like workaholism. That's what mine looks like. I just start working a lot more, and mostly because I'm forgetting things and I'm having to do things double time. So if I'm not being deeply aware and doing some of the self-assessments about what compassion fatigue is in my, like where I'm at with my compassion fatigue, then I am most likely going to start getting to a place, getting into this old pattern of workaholism. And I might start getting super cynical. Some other folks might feel like I'm crying for no apparent reason. Normally there's some reason why we're crying, and it's because there's so many pent up feelings around the fatigue that we're feeling, some of the other powerlessness that we're feeling, and frankly, just some of the sadness that we're feeling with the COVID-19 crisis. And just like the last point I want to drive home, if you will, to just use an old idiom, is how do we overcome compassion fatigue in our own communities? You all probably have seen a comic similar to this, like put your own oxygen mask on first. Like if you're not practicing this already, I encourage you to start doing this before you start expecting your colleagues or your staff to start doing it. And what we call our department, we call it CSS, or Crisis Student Services. What we do here is really focus on what is our self-talk. Like, are we creating an opportunity for focus statements for our staff? So you're like, what the heck are you talking about, Lula? What does focus statements really mean? We really try to encourage folks to create an intention around what their day might look like. Sometimes our intention is just to be available and to be of service to students. Sometimes it's just to be able to listen without any bringing in of our own baggage. So I might have to do some of my own personal work before I even talk to a student. And so what does that self-talk look like for you? And I also think once you start doing this at work and you start doing your personal life, your spouses are going to feel so happy about that. They're going to see a huge difference because you'll start integrating self-care tools as well. So some self-care tools might include body work. It might include body work for some people, might be a massage, acupuncture, anything like that. It might also include exercise. For some folks, they really like processing, metabolizing, what we call metabolizing that trauma, or that vicarious trauma, if you will. We want to make sure that we're getting that out of our system, right? And the last thing that I think is, like, I could not talk enough about, but just for the sake of time, I'll just spend like 1 or 2 minutes on, is organizational self-care. So for the sake of this, we're just going to think of organizations as colleges, universities, and academic institutions right now. But organizational self-care is like, what policies have you created, or what policies have you that are already happening at on your campuses that could potentially be supporting your staff. So I'll give you some examples of what we do here. So we have, not only have we been doing flex working from home for a long time here, but we've also we have an opportunity where folks are feeling deeply tapped out. They just get to talk to their manager and figure out ways that they can start integrating things like admin hours. So that's already built into the infrastructure, and it doesn't have to be such a shame base. I don't know if y'all have ever experienced like feeling that guilt of not wanting to talk to somebody about just the deep sense of powerlessness that you're experiencing, and not feeling like you can actually have just like have those opportunities built into your job. Like maybe you never want to tell your boss that you feel like you can't do anymore that day. But just bridging that gap and just having those conversations with your staff in a way that doesn't feel too personal, overstepping, and building it into your HR infrastructure makes an enormous difference. And so we've tried to build that in along with a lot of financial resources, counseling and therapeutic resources, and grief support available to our staff. So you might have this already available on your campuses, but I'd be curious, like, what are things that you can start doing that's really what is your organization doing to really encourage a culture of self-care so that your staff can be productive and continue to thrive? I feel like that's it for right now, and then we can just focus on questions.
Thank you, Lula. We do have some questions, some quite specific questions too, which I think are appropriate to ask right now. Can you speak to how to respond to a student who's perhaps lost a parent, another family member to COVID-19, particularly in areas where you can't go to a funeral, you can't go mourn because of the quarantine?
Yeah, so what we try to do is, my background is also in grief support. So one of the skills that I've been working on building is being a companion in folks' grief. So if a student is sharing that with you and they've shared, or even a staff member or colleague is sharing that they've lost somebody, and they don't even get to be part of the funeral and be part of the grieving, like the physical part of the grieving process, it's really important for people to create rituals around this. This is why funerals are so important for folks. It's really important for there to be some sort of ritual that they create in place. And you don't have to have the answers. Just remember that. You do not have to have the answers. You just need to be willing to listen. And one of the things that I think like is a little skill that I've started incorporating is I try to not say I'm sorry unless I actually know that person pretty well, or I've been working with that student for a really long time, or I know the person they've lost.
Why is that?
Because it feels vapid for
Mm.
folks. What I do say instead is, I can't imagine what you're going through. What a tremendous loss. And I mean that deeply. I'm not saying that in a way that's just like a rote statement that I say over and over again. It's just because it's just, I can't imagine what they're going through. And they need to be able to hear that you get that it is completely overwhelming and deeply, I don't know. It's not just like overwhelming, but it's like this feeling of not wanting to forget somebody's memory. One of the resources that might be available I did a training with called a Grief Recovery Institute, and their focus is on learning how to process the pain related to grief and focus on the memories and whether they be good, bad, or just the facts. And it's just, I found that to be really helpful. I also think if you're going to look at any other models for grief work, I would also look at things that the Zen Hospice Center had done. Your library probably has all these books on campus, so I doubt you have to spend any money on these things. And a lot of these resources are online for free. But they have a lot of resources out there that are specifically about being a companion in people's grief.
Lula, something that you had shared with me after you went through that training was that there's this concept that they're the stages of grief and you move through them, and once you're done with them, you've completed it and you're on to the next one until you're all done with it. And you shared that while there are different like aspects of grief, that there isn't a linear timeline and it can be cyclical, and there is no right way or stage or time frame for grief. And I think that was really something that was new for me to hear, and in sharing that with other people who are experiencing grief, I think can be really reassuring that they're not grieving wrong. What they're feeling isn't, abnormal.
Yeah, I mean, for the longest time, I'd be like, well, I'm in the anger stage. I would say stuff like that before I was, unfortunately, that was my default for a long time. But it is, I, what I was told, and you all might know this information better than I do, but what I was told is that that model, the like stages of grief, wasn't actually supposed to ever be stages. It was just supposed to be the different experiences that somebody would be experiencing back and forth. That it was never supposed to be, like you said, Renee, it's never supposed to be linear. And the person that created that model was just trying to say, like, these are the things that somebody goes through while in the experience.
Denial, anger, bargaining,
Mm-hmm.
depression,
Mm-hmm.
acceptance, right?
Yeah. I mean, just the other day, my wife used something at my house that was from my grandmother, who I was really close to, who passed last year. And I was like, we don't touch that. Like, it still smells like, I was like so upset. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have such an attachment to this, and that's okay. But it was interesting because I thought that I was like over there. I had processed it, and I was like, no, this is going to be with me for a long time, and it's okay that it's going to be with me.
Hey, while we're talking about loss, in this case, death, other folks are experiencing loss of jobs, loss of income, all sorts of like layoffs and things like that. We've got a question about what's the best response if someone has lost their job, there's economic hardships. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, we still do. We use the grief model for any loss related to work, divorce, relationship. I mean, frankly, it's really also a loss of expectations too, because you expected to be in a different financial place. Like, it's just, I mean, loss of security, that's part of it too. So we do a grief model for our students, and we focus on getting them connected to basic needs resources. So you might be doing both. And that might feel like counterintuitive, but it really is the right and the best way for people to hear that, and also validate those students experiencing like, this is an incredible loss for you.
Sure.
Like, it is.
Of course.
Even if you just think it's just a service industry job, or it's just this, like, no judgment. It has nothing to do with you. This is their life.
Another question just about language barriers. With if someone has different language skills, how can you help those folks, whether they're international, whether they're wherever they're from?
Yeah. So English is my second language, and it and I always feel like this is a near and dear place for me, because of my own personal experiences. And I would say that one of the things that we do here is we also work with students in a lot of countries that I don't speak the language in, and we still have been able to support them. So you might be feeling some powerlessness because you're like, I don't speak the language. What the heck am I supposed to say? But I really want to be available for them. Like, students can hear your tone and caring. And they can hear for like your deep sense of compassion beyond just the words that you're saying. So just remember that and continue to talk to them, obviously without raising your voice. I know we all know that, but just a reminder. But one of the things that we do is we also try to find experts in their own community. So let's say that they're a person from Cambodia and they speak a specific dialect from Cambodia. We might want to make sure that we are looking for grief support related to that community. There are also some cultural differences that come along with
Which
that too.
someone has just raised as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the great resources for us is we work closely. We had a training from some folks from the IRC, so the International Rescue Committee came and gave us some training on some of the cultural differences. That's like a really easy way. They're a nonprofit that does that kind of work, and they can talk to you about, like, if you have a student population, like let's say you have a big Somalian population on your campus, like, utilize your resources, have somebody come in and talk about those differences. When I went to this intensive grief training over a weekend, and they were talking about the difference with refugees too, and how it is for some folks that they could not process why people were doing certain things. But really, after it was reframed, and the people from the refugee organization shared, like, these are actually ways, the most normal ways for people to grieve in their community, and this is the way they honor their dead. It was like everybody in the room just like sighed this sense of relief, and it was so powerful because suddenly they stopped trying to impose their own ideas. So this goes back to that, like, active, that skillful non-judgmental listening is like no judgment. I mean, if you have to put a sticky note to yourself, like, no judgment. Remind yourself it's not about you.
That's great. Do you have any suggested resources for creating new rituals, especially with like no graduations, perhaps no mourning, things like that? I don't know.
I would ask
That's a
what your
tough one.
Yeah, I would also ask what your students want to do.
Hmm.
I mean, remember, they're the experts too about their
Yeah.
own experiences. So they might have some ideas of what they wish that it could look like.
Yeah.
You might be trying to simulate the same experience, and it's not going to work the same way, and that's
Right.
okay. But you could also give folks something tangible eventually. You can give an opportunity for something tangible in the future so that they can get that interconnectedness to your university once they've graduated. So that's just, I think there's a lot of different ideas out there already that people are coming up with. And if you want to ever email me, I can send you some of the resources I have. My email is lula.torres@insidetrack.com.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Hey,
I'll just
go,
kind of
Renee. Go.
add on to that as someone who's about to graduate and having some similar conversations with my cohort. I absolutely what Lula said, like asking them what's the most important thing, like validating the loss of this experience. And then, was it that they were really looking forward to being able to have family hear their name get called out? Was it that they really wanted that picture of them in a cap and gown so they could have on their desk? Like, what was it the wind on their face as they walked across the stage? And then what might be the contingency plan? Like, well, great, you would be welcome to come back and walk across the stage later on when things have cleared, but we can still do this. Or like, what is the need? What was their hope? And listening to that, and even if you can't fix it, at least being able to like understand and listen, use that, trauma-informed communication of saying like, what about that?
Thanks, Renee. Someone's asked about what your experience has been talking to nonprofits, community organizations right now, as we're expecting that they're just overwhelmed with stuff right now because of COVID-19. And have they been open to you and building that advocacy?
Yeah, I think when we talk to them, they're just like, we are so overwhelmed. And sometimes
Yeah,
it's just nice for them to for me to just like hold space and talk to them about what's happening.
sure.
But what they do, they normally have been telling me like, this is a timeline that we're looking at. So I actually have some actionable insight, if you will. Right now, I'm going to be working with some nonprofits in Pennsylvania that I'll be following up with in 3 weeks. So I'm not just, it doesn't feel like they're just saying, I'm overwhelmed, good luck to you, hang up. That's not what happens. And it frankly has never happened to me, even in the worst case scenarios. So what I would encourage you to do is validate it, call them and just say like, I know things are really insane right now and it's really difficult to actually know what the outcomes are going to be, but I really want to talk to you about like what should I be anticipating to connect my students to some basic needs, housing or transitional options for them and their family, or is that not something that's even real? Now remember, this is different county to county because your county actually might have a lot of policies that are already in place. Your mayor may have announced them on their Twitter feed. It could be anywhere. It could be in the news, but there might be no more evictions happening in your campus, within your county. That's something that happened. I live in Tucson, Arizona, and here they're not doing any evictions during this time, no matter what. So that gives a sense of relief that people that are living in homes can get some housing, and they're trying to get everybody who's sleeping on the streets right now because they're experiencing homelessness, that they're actually getting some safe places to stay right now.
We've only got time for just a couple more questions, friends. Thank you for all of the questions that are in there. I need to let us go here in about 5 minutes, though. Lula, how can we apply trauma-informed communication in advising sessions? Thoughts?
Yeah, I would say like use transparency while you're talking to students, and start. I think the biggest difference for me when I started using this was I stopped having an agenda each time. Like, I know that y'all have to talk about some specific things. You're going to have to get some things that you have to address, and that's totally reasonable. But be really transparent about that with students. Like, hey, there are some things that we do need to talk about that are some of the housekeeping items, but I know how hard things have been, and I want to check in with you and see how you're coping right now. And just say that, and just wait for the student, because there's not that many people that are actually asking them these questions at the moment.
Yeah. What are some examples of self-talk strategies?
Oh, wow. Focus statements, intention statements for our life.
You called them mantras yesterday.
Yeah, you could call them mantras. I think
Like Oprah.
some people, I have this friend in my life that says like she tries to reframe it as like, what would Oprah do? So if you need to do that, then whoever
Do
that
that.
person is.
Yeah.
But I think like what a lot of people try to do is think about, like, we know that anxiety can be deeply contagious, but you may want to breathe in and like have a moment to exhale in your life. And so maybe your mantra today is to just take things one step at a time, and not really have an expectation that it's all going to be resolved in the next 5 minutes, because that's unreasonable.
Absolutely unreasonable. We'll have one last question. How do we help students stay motivated, especially as they are moving to online school? It's a whole different modality. It's a different way of doing school. Any thoughts on how to just to keep people going?
I mean, you'll be surprised at how many students it's really important for them to have normalcy in schedules right now. And I think they might feel some disappointed that they're doing online classes when they feel like they only thrive. There's a lot of students that I've heard from that are like, I only do well on in-person classes, and that's okay, but that might be old messaging for them. It's not this online classes are not the same as what's happening right now. They're not just taking an online class. A lot of these are live webinars. A lot of them are live Zoom meetings. What I have seen some campuses do across the country is they're creating really specific lists and suggestions from students about best practices. So it's not coming from us, because a lot of us know how to do this already, and we know how to interact with people online. It's actually coming from other students, and I think like lean on your students that know how to navigate these tools, and use them as your own personal experts.
Thank you so much. We want to thank Christy from Texas, of course. Thank you to all of our attendees who are here. Thank you for participating. Jesus, it was a 90-minute session, and some of you made it through. Well done. Most of all, thank you to Renee and Lula for offering this perspective. We just hope and think of all of you as you do this very important work right now in supporting your students, whether they are young or old or wherever they may be. We think of you. So you'll see this up posted on the website later. I know that Christy has been gathering the different resources that Lula said as well, so you can see that there. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye, y'all.